Sir, I already told you those bags are mine. I paid for everything in there.
Ma'am, I understand what you're saying. I just need to see the receipt and get your ID.
I have my receipt. It's in my purse. I just don't understand why I'm being stopped like this.
Just need to verify.
Saturday morning, 10:45 a.m. Minnesota spring was doing that cruel thing it always did, teasing warmth while the air still had bite. Sunlight flashed off rows of metal shopping carts like scattered diamonds, and the grocery store parking lot hummed with the lazy rhythm of weekend families. Engines idled. Trunks popped open. Kids tugged at sleeves, begging for snacks before anyone even made it through the automatic doors. Victoria Benjamin pulled in for what was supposed to be a simple, forgettable errand. Quick groceries. Then straight to her mother's house. She wore weekend clothes, a light jacket over a plain tee. Yoga pants? Sneakers, nothing about her, screamed high-powered attorney or someone you should not underestimate. A worn kid's backpack hung from one shoulder because motherhood didn't pause just because life was busy. Her rental car rolled to a stop, and she exhaled like this was the first calm moment of her week. In the back seat, her 8-year-old son, Alex, leaned forward, talking nonstop about lunch. Can we get the rotisserie chicken, the one Grandma likes? And can we get the cinnamon bread too? His voice was bright, carefree, exactly how children sound when the world still feels safe. Beside him, 6-year-old Jaime already had both hands on the grocery bag, sneaking an apple like it was a secret mission. She took one bite, cheeks puffed, eyes sparkling with the tiny victory of getting away with it. Victoria smiled, shook her head, and opened the trunk. She was halfway through stacking reusable bags when she felt that shift in the air you only notice when something is wrong. Not a sound. Not a shout. Just pressure. The kind that makes your shoulders tighten before your brain catches up. Across the lot, an unmarked SUV sat angled toward her lane. Victoria hadn't noticed it when she pulled in. She noticed it now because the doors opened all at once, and 3 men stepped out with the synchronized confidence of people who believed they owned the space around them. Tactical vests, hard stares, purposeful stride, and clipped to their chests small red lights blinking steadily. Body cameras were already recording. They weren't walking toward the store. They weren't scanning the crowd. They were moving straight toward her. And as they crossed the sunlit asphalt, closing the distance like this was routine, Victoria Benjamin realized this was no longer a grocery run. This was the beginning of a case. So, if you're ready to watch a system expose itself in broad daylight, stay with me, because by the end of this story, those cameras won't protect the agents wearing them. They'll bury them. Agent Dwight Palmer led the approach. He walked slightly ahead of the other 2. Shoulders squared. Chin lifted. The posture of a man used to being obeyed without question. To his left, Agent Kowalski fanned out wide, angling toward the passenger side of Victoria's car. To the right, Agent Briggs drifted toward the shopping cart and the store entrance, quietly cutting off space without ever saying a word. It wasn't random. It was textbook. A soft perimeter closing in. Victoria clocked it instantly. 15 years in courtrooms had trained her to read intent faster than tone. Prosecutors didn't have to shout to threaten. Judges didn't need to raise their voices to control a room. And federal agents didn't need guns drawn to signal power. This formation said everything. They weren't here to ask. They were here to take. She kept her movements slow, deliberate. Groceries into the trunk. One bag at a time. Hands visible. No sudden turns. Her mind shifted gears automatically, the way it always did when stakes rose. Assume you're being recorded. Speak clearly. Do nothing that can be misinterpreted. Her pulse stayed steady, but her awareness sharpened to a fine point. Alex noticed before she did. His voice trailed off mid-sentence. Mom, he tilted his head. Eyes fixed on the men closing in. The excitement drained from his face. Replaced by confusion he didn't have language for yet. Jaime tightened her grip on the apple bag and pressed into Victoria's leg. Small fingers curling into fabric. Children knew danger before adults admitted it. The agent stopped just short of arm's length. Agent Palmer spoke first. His voice was flat. Practiced. Stripped of warmth or hesitation. The sound of something recited 1,000 times before. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. He said, flashing the patch on his vest without reaching for a badge. We're conducting a compliance check in this area. The words floated there, heavy and impersonal. Victoria closed the trunk gently. No slamming. No defiance. She turned to face him, keeping her posture neutral. Her hands relaxed at her sides where they could be seen. She didn't ask why. She didn't challenge yet. Not until she knew how far they planned to go. Palmer's eyes moved over her, not her car. Not the groceries. Not the kids, but her. Head to toe. Clothing. Hair. Skin. He made a decision, and then spoke like it was already justified. I need to see identification and proof of legal status. No inflection. No explanation. No apology. Procedure. Delivered like judgment. Around them, the parking lot continued breathing. A minivan backed out 2 rows over. A couple laughed near the entrance. Arms full of paper bags. Somewhere, a cart rattled across pavement. Ordinary life carried on. Completely unaware that, in this small pocket of asphalt, the balance of power had just tilted. Victoria felt the familiar heat bloom in her chest, not panic, not fear, but recognition. The kind that comes when you've seen this play out before. In transcripts. In testimony. In cases where the ending was already written by the opening assumption. She met Palmer's gaze calmly, and before he could say another word, Victoria Benjamin did something they weren't prepared for. She identified herself. Victoria didn't raise her voice. She didn't rush her words. She spoke the way she did in court, measured. Precise. Impossible to mishear. I'm a licensed attorney, she said. Texas State Bar. My name is Victoria Benjamin. My identification and bar card are in my wallet. Inside the vehicle. She gestured slowly toward the open car door, careful to keep every movement deliberate. Visible. This wasn't defiance. This was cooperation done correctly. By the book. For a brief moment, just a flicker, she expected the interaction to change. Credentials had weight. Verification was easy. One call. One database search. Any reasonable officer would pause here. Agent Palmer didn't. He didn't nod. Didn't step back. Didn't even acknowledge the word attorney. His eyes stayed hard. His stance unchanged. Like she'd just offered an excuse instead of professional identification. Do you have documentation on you right now? He asked. Proving citizenship. The question landed differently than the last one. Sharper. Heavier. Built on disbelief. Victoria felt the heat rise. Slow and controlled. Behind her ribs. Not anger yet. Something colder. Recognition. She'd seen this before, people deciding who you were allowed to be before you ever opened your mouth. My driver's license and my Texas State Bar card are in my wallet, she repeated. If you contact the State Bar of Texas, they will verify my identity immediately. I've been practicing law for 15 years. Behind Palmer. Kowalski shifted. He moved closer to the passenger side window, leaning just enough to peer inside the car, eyes scanning like he expected to find something incriminating between the booster seat and the grocery bags. Briggs drifted toward the shopping cart. placing himself between Victoria and the store entrance without ever saying a word. The box was closing. Alex stood frozen beside the cart, hands clenched at his sides. "Mom," he whispered, his voice thinner now, uncertain. Jaime's small hand slipped into Victoria's, gripping tight. Victoria squeezed back without looking down. "It's okay, baby," she said quietly, never breaking eye contact with Palmer. Palmer's voice cooled further, stripping away even the pretense of conversation. "We'll verify once we establish identity and status." Victoria inhaled slowly through her nose. That sentence, so casually delivered, was legally backward in every possible way. You verified identity to establish status. Not the other way around. They weren't confused. They were choosing. "There is no reasonable suspicion here," Victoria said, her tone steady. "Factual. I'm on a grocery run with my children. I've identified myself and offered verifiable credentials." Palmer's jaw tightened. He didn't respond to the law. He didn't respond to reason. He responded to authority, his own. "Do not reach into the vehicle," he said, as Victoria shifted her weight slightly. "Hands where I can see them." The parking lot seemed to quiet around them, like the air itself was holding its breath. A woman 2 rows over slowed her steps, phone already in her hand. An older man near the entrance stopped pushing his cart and turned fully to watch. Victoria stood still, hands visible, heart steady but mind racing. They weren't listening. They weren't verifying. And she knew, with a certainty born of years spent dissecting abuse of power, that this was about to cross from uncomfortable into unlawful. The moment had arrived, the kind that ends up in transcripts, the kind that ends careers. Victoria shifted her weight slightly, careful, controlled, and reached toward the passenger seat where her purse rested in plain view. She moved the way lawyers always tell clients to move around armed officers, slow enough to feel almost exaggerated. Hands open. No sudden angles. Agent Palmer reacted instantly. "Stop." The word cracked through the air, sharp and final. His hand dropped to his belt, fingers brushing the grip of his weapon. Kowalski straightened, eyes narrowing. And Briggs took one deliberate step closer to the cart, closer to the children. "Don't reach for anything," Palmer said. "Step away from the vehicle." Victoria froze mid-motion, her hand suspended inches from her purse. She withdrew it slowly, lifting both hands again so there could be no misunderstanding. "I'm retrieving my identification," she said calmly. "You asked for documentation. It's in my wallet." Palmer didn't acknowledge the logic. He repeated the command, louder this time, so everyone nearby could hear it. "Step away from the vehicle. Now." The authority in his voice carried weight, the kind meant to erase discussion. Victoria stepped back, placing distance between herself and the car. Hands raised, palms out. "I'm complying," she said clearly. "I am Victoria Benjamin. I am a member of the Texas State Bar. License number 73492. I am unarmed. My children are present. There is no reasonable suspicion to justify this stop." She spoke deliberately, projecting her words toward the blinking red lights on their chests, toward the phones now clearly lifted by onlookers. She wanted the record clean. She wanted every syllable preserved. Around them, the parking lot kept moving. But the energy had shifted. A woman pushing a stroller stopped outright. Phone raised. A man leaned against his car, openly filming. A store employee near the entrance paused, eyes locked on the scene unfolding. Alex's breathing grew shallow. "Mom, what's happening?" His voice cracked on the last word. Victoria didn't turn. She couldn't afford to break eye contact. "Stand right there." "Alex," she said softly. "Stay with your sister." Jaime's fingers dug into her leg. Knuckles white, Palmer stepped forward, closing the space she'd just created. "You are being detained while we verify your status." "That is an unlawful detention," Victoria replied without hesitation. "You have articulated no reasonable suspicion. You are violating my Fourth Amendment rights." The words hit him like static. Legal language. Specific. Uncomfortable. For a split second, Palmer hesitated. Then he made a choice. He reached out and grabbed Victoria's wrist. The motion was sudden, violent in its contrast to everything that had come before. Her arm twisted behind her back as pain flared hot and sharp. Metal cuffs appeared in Palmer's hands with practiced speed. "Mom!" Alex screamed. Jaime cried out as the apple bag slipped from her hands. Fruit scattering across the pavement. "I am not resisting," Victoria said through clenched teeth as the cuffs snapped shut, biting into her wrists. "This is an unlawful seizure. I am a United States citizen. I was born in Houston, Texas. This is being recorded." Palmer didn't respond. Kowalski moved in to secure her other arm. Briggs positioned himself between Victoria and her children, his presence a silent barrier as Alex took an instinctive step forward and was stopped cold. Phones were everywhere now. Voices rose. Someone shouted, "Hey!" Another voice called out, "What's her crime?" Victoria kept her breathing steady, her voice controlled, even as her heart hammered. "This is a violation of my constitutional rights," she said, loud enough for every camera. "My name is Victoria Benjamin, Texas State Bar. You will answer for this." Palmer began walking her toward the SUV. Behind them, the parking lot buzzed with disbelief, and in that moment, handcuffed in front of her children, groceries spilled at her feet. Strangers recording what power looked like when it stopped, pretending this stopped being an encounter. It became evidence. Palmer didn't slow his pace as he walked Victoria across the asphalt. His grip on her arm was firm, impersonal. The kind of hold that treated a human body like a problem to be moved out of the way. Kowalski stayed tight on her other side, guiding her forward while Briggs lingered behind, positioned squarely between Victoria and her children. "Mom!" Alex's voice broke again. Higher now, edged with panic. He tried to move around Briggs, small legs carrying him forward before fear caught up. Briggs stepped laterally without touching him, blocking the path with his body alone. "Stay right there," Victoria called out, forcing calm into her voice even as pain throbbed through her wrists. "Don't move. I'm okay. I need you to listen to me." She didn't turn around. She couldn't. The image of their faces confused. Terrified was something she refused to let fracture her composure. Not here. Not now. The bystanders had fully engaged. Phones were held high. A woman shouted. "She said she's a lawyer," another voice cut through. Angry and incredulous. This is in front of her kids. A grocery cart clattered across the pavement. Abandoned. A store employee rushed from the entrance, eyes wide. Drawn by the sound of Alex crying, someone else called out, asking if the agents had a warrant. Palmer didn't answer anyone. Victoria did. "This is an unlawful seizure," she said, projecting clearly despite the movement. "I am not resisting. I have identified myself. You have refused to verify my credentials. There is no probable cause and no reasonable suspicion. You are violating my Fourth Amendment rights." Each sentence was deliberate, each one for the record. They reached the SUV. Palmer opened the rear door and guided her head down with a firm hand. The practiced motion of someone who had done this countless times without ever being challenged. As she was seated inside, the world outside the tinted window fractured into pieces her children's faces. The store employee kneeling beside them. Jaime reaching out with both hands, her mouth forming the word mama again and again. The door slammed shut. The sound was final, heavy, sealing. The SUV pulled away from the curb, tires crunching over scattered apples and bread. Victoria watched through the glass as the parking lot shrank behind them, as the employee gathered her children close, as her rental car sat abandoned with its trunk still open and groceries strewn across the asphalt. Inside the vehicle, the tone shifted instantly. Palmer and Kowalski spoke in low voices from the front seats. Casual, almost bored. The radio crackled with dispatch codes. A GPS screen glowed between them, already plotting a route. Victoria sat upright, wrists aching, shoulders tense, and listened. "That's 3 this week, from this zone," Kowalski said, his voice carrying easily to the back seat. "Should put us over quota for the month." Palmer grunted. "They're really pushing minority neighborhoods right now. Easy numbers." The words landed like blunt force. Victoria kept her face neutral, eyes forward, breathing slow, inside. Her mind locked onto the conversation with ruthless precision. The phrasing, the tone, the casual confidence, this wasn't speculation. This was policy spoken out loud. She committed every word to memory. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a mistake. This was a system. And sitting 3 feet behind them, in handcuffs, was the worst possible witness they could have chosen. The drive took 28 minutes. Victoria counted them by landmarks reflected in the tinted glass and by the steady ache settling deeper into her wrists. Each turn of the SUV pulled her farther from the parking lot, farther from her children, and deeper into a process that hadn't bothered to justify itself even once. The facility emerged from behind a row of warehouses, low concrete, chain-link fencing crowned with coils of razor wire. The kind of place designed to look temporary while functioning permanently. Institutional gray under a sky that had lost its morning warmth. They parked. The engine cut. The sudden silence rang. Palmer opened the rear door and gestured without looking at her. Out. Victoria stepped down carefully, her balance off from the cuffs. She straightened her spine the way she did before walking into court posture as armor. Cameras followed every movement. The red lights never blinked off. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant and stale coffee. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, flattening everything into shades of pale white and concrete. A different agent waited at the processing desk. His name tag read Phillips. Phillips took her fingerprints without meeting her eyes, rolled each finger like it was part of a routine he could perform in his sleep. No questions. No curiosity. "I'm requesting legal counsel," Victoria said calmly. "And I'm requesting immediate verification of my identity and bar membership." "In process," Phillips replied without inflection. "Standard procedure." "Under what authority am I being detained?" she asked. "What reasonable suspicion justified this seizure? Have I been charged with anything?" Phillips didn't answer. He looked past her shoulder instead, toward Palmer, who gave a small nod. That was all it took. They took her phone, her wallet, her keys. She was still handcuffed. Time stretched. Minutes bled into each other without markers. When Victoria spoke, it was precise and controlled questions, framed like cross-examination. Challenges wrapped in professional calm. Each one met the same response. In due time. At one point, Phillips left the room, When he returned, nothing had changed. They weren't verifying. They were stalling. Realization crept in slowly. Then all at once, they were checking her story, running her name through systems that weren't built to expect someone like her. A black woman in weekend clothes. No badge. No uniform. Just words they hadn't believed. Eventually, they led her down a short hallway and opened a heavy metal door. The holding cell was small, 8 by 10 feet. A metal bench bolted to the wall. No windows. Just reinforced glass facing the corridor. The handcuffs finally came off, leaving red welts around her wrists that pulsed with heat. The door closed with a mechanical click that echoed louder than it should have. Victoria sat down slowly, her back straight, her hands resting on her knees. Across the hall, a clock hung crooked on the wall. 12:17 p.m. 1 hour and 27 minutes since Palmer had grabbed her wrist. Her children were still somewhere with strangers. Her mother didn't know where she was. Her car sat abandoned in a grocery store parking lot with the trunk open and groceries baking in the midday sun. Victoria stared at the clock and began organizing. Fourth Amendment violation. Unlawful seizure. Racial profiling. Emotional distress aggravated by the presence of minor children. Denial of due process. Each tick of the clock added another data point. They thought this room would break her. What it actually gave her was time. Time to remember every word. Time to map every violation. Time to build the skeleton of a case that would not stop at this building. Outside the cell, agents moved back and forth with paperwork, unaware that inside, a seasoned attorney was turning their indifference into a weapon. The system was still moving. So was she. Time passed differently inside the holding cell. There were no windows. No sense of morning or afternoon, only the low hum of fluorescent lights and the uneven ticking of the hallway clock visible through reinforced glass. Victoria sat upright on the cold metal bench. Wrists marked red where the cuffs had been. The ache dull but constant. She welcomed it. Pain kept her anchored, focused. 12:30 p.m. Then 1:00. Then 1:45. No one came. Outside the cell, agents moved in and out of view carrying clipboards and folders. Voices muted. Footsteps unhurried. This wasn't urgency. This was bureaucracy doing what it did best, delaying accountability until it hoped resistance softened. Victoria didn't soften. She replayed the parking lot frame by frame. Palmer's exact wording. Kowalski's position near the passenger door. Briggs blocking the children. The moment her credentials were dismissed without verification. The handcuffs. Alex's scream. Jaime's tears. The bystanders' phones. The badge numbers she'd memorized without even trying. And then the SUV. 3 this week, from this zone. Should put us over quota. Pushing minority neighborhoods. Easy numbers. She repeated the words silently until the cadence locked in permanently. Not paraphrased. Not summarized. Verbatim. At 2:00 p.m. The weight of it hit her, not fear. Not anger. But scale. This wasn't just her case. If what she'd heard was true, and she knew it was, then this was policy. Metrics. Incentives. A system that turned neighborhoods into hunting grounds and human beings into numbers. Her children were collateral damage. The thought tightened something in her chest she hadn't allowed herself to feel yet. Alex's face when the cuffs clicked shut. Jaime reaching for her as the SUV door closed. The way their trust in the world had fractured in a single, irreversible moment. Victoria closed her eyes briefly. 1 breath in, 1 breath out. She would not let this end quietly. At doi trezich, she opt p. M. The cell door finally opened. Philip stood there again. Posture unchanged. Expression carefully neutral. We've confirmed your identity. He said, You're free to go. No apology. No explanation. No acknowledgement of the hours stolen. Victoria stood slowly, rolling her shoulders back, smoothing her jacket as if preparing to step into a courtroom. I want copies of all body camera footage from today. She said, I want the names and badge numbers of every agent involved. I want the incident report number and the name of the supervising officer on duty. Phillips hesitated just long enough. You can file a request through proper channels. I'm making that request now. Victoria replied evenly. On the record. That hesitation told her everything. They returned her belongings at the property desk phone. Wallet. Keys. Her hands shook slightly as she took them. Not from weakness, but from restraint. Outside. The late afternoon sun felt almost aggressive after hours under artificial light. A taxi waited at the curb. Her mother had arranged it after frantic calls from the grocery store employee. Victoria slid into the back seat and closed her eyes as the car pulled away. This part was over. What came next would be deliberate, documented, public. They had let her go thinking the damage was done. They were wrong. The damage was just beginning for them. The reunion shattered her composure. The moment Victoria stepped through her mother's front door, Alex and Jaime ran straight into her. Small bodies colliding with hers so hard she nearly lost her balance. Their arms wrapped around her waist. Their faces buried into her jacket like they were afraid she might disappear again. Mama, mama, mama. The word repeated over and over. Frantic. Desperate. As if saying it enough times could lock her in place. Victoria dropped to her knees right there in the entryway. Grocery bags still sitting untouched by the door. And held them tighter than she ever had before. I'm here, she whispered. Her voice finally breaking. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Alex was shaking. Jaime's tears soaked through her sleeve. Victoria felt her own tears spill freely now hot. Unstoppable because the fight was over and the cost had finally landed. Not the cuffs. Not the cell. This was the damage. Her mother, Dorothy, stood a few steps back. 73 years of Texas strength etched into her posture. Eyes shining with quiet fury. She didn't interrupt. She let them cling. Let the moment run its course. Later, when the children had washed their faces and curled up on the couch under blankets, Dorothy poured 2 glasses of water and slid one across the kitchen table. They put handcuffs on you, she said softly, in front of your babies. Victoria nodded. The words still felt too heavy to shape properly. Her wrists throbbed where the metal had bitten in. Red marks still visible. Still real. Dorothy's jaw tightened. What are you going to do? Victoria didn't hesitate. What I was trained to do, she said. Her voice steady again. Colder now. I'm going to take them apart. That night, after Alex and Jamie finally fell asleep, Alex refusing to leave her bed, Jaime curled against her side. Victoria sat at the dining table with her laptop open and a legal pad beside it. She didn't rely on memory alone. She documented everything. Timestamps, exact quotes, badge numbers, positions, distances, the tactical formation, the dismissal of her credentials, the cuffs, the children's reactions, the quota conversation word for word. She downloaded bystander videos already circulating online. Backed them up. Then backed them up again. She wrote until her hand cramped. until the rage sharpened into clarity. This wasn't just about what they did to her. It was about what they'd revealed casually, confidently, about how they operated when they thought no one important was listening. Victoria closed her notebook just after midnight. She already knew who she was calling in the morning, and she already knew this would not end quietly. 2 days later, Victoria sat across from James Whitfield in a quiet office just outside downtown Houston. Whitfield had the kind of reputation that didn't need explaining. Civil rights cases, institutional abuse, verdicts that forced policy changes instead of press releases. His walls were lined with framed judgments, numbers, dates, names, each one a system that had underestimated the wrong person. He didn't interrupt while Victoria spoke. She laid it out cleanly. The parking lot, the formation, the refusal to verify, the cuffs, the children, the cell, and then carefully, precisely, she repeated the conversation from inside the SUV. Not paraphrased, not softened. 3 this week from this zone, she said, should put us over quota for the month. Palmer said, they're pushing minority neighborhoods. Easy numbers. Don't demender 20 days with power 47. Not again. Whitfield's pen stopped moving. He leaned back slowly, studying her the way trial lawyers study witnesses looking for cracks, exaggeration, emotion that didn't belong. He found none. You heard this directly, he said. In the vehicle, word for word. Victoria replied. I documented it the same night. Time-stamped. Witnessed by my mother. Whitfield exhaled, a thin smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. Not amusement. Recognition. Ms. Benjamin, he said. They didn't just violate your rights. They handed you the key to expose an entire operation. The lawsuit was filed 3 weeks later. It named the United States government, the Department of Homeland Security, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and individually agents Dwight Palmer, Kowalski, and Briggs. The charges were devastating in their clarity. Unlawful detention, Fourth Amendment violations, racial profiling, infliction of emotional distress, denial of due process. The evidence stack was thick. 6 bystander videos from different angles. Store employee testimony detailing the children's condition. Medical evaluations documenting anxiety, nightmares, fear of uniformed officers. Victoria's credentials, Texas State Bar, in good standing. 15 years of practice. No criminal history. And buried deep in the filings, waiting for the right moment, was the quota system. The government responded fast. A settlement offer arrived before the ink on the complaint had fully dried. $75,000. Confidentiality clause attached. No admission of wrongdoing. Sign here. Go away quietly. Victoria didn't even blink. No, she said. Whitfield delivered the rejection in person. In open court. With media present, Miss Benjamin declines the offer. She seeks a public trial to expose the systematic violations that led to her unlawful detention and to prevent future abuses. The next offer came higher, then higher still, always with the same condition. Silence. Victoria rejected every one. They could keep their money. What she wanted was a record, and she was prepared to make it permanent. Discovery was where everything unraveled. What the government had hoped to bury in sealed settlements now had to be produced under oath. Emails, performance reviews, internal guidance memos. Whitfield's team pushed hard, filing targeted requests that zeroed in on detention metrics for the Minnesota region, numbers broken down by zip code, race, and officer. The patterns jumped off the page. Minority neighborhoods were being targeted at nearly 3 times the rate of predominantly white areas. Despite identical legal status distributions, detention numbers were tied directly to agent evaluations. Phrases like productivity, zone output, and monthly targets appeared again and again, carefully avoiding the word quota while describing exactly that. The defense tried to slow it down. Motions to suppress. Arguments about relevance. Claims of officer discretion and good faith enforcement. Each one fell apart under the weight of their own paperwork. Depositions followed. Palmer went first, under oath, in a gray conference room. He claimed routine procedure, said he'd received general intelligence about undocumented individuals in the area. When Whitfield asked him to produce that intelligence, Palmer couldn't. No tip, no bolo, no report. Just a feeling. Behavioral indicators, he said. What indicators? Whitfield asked. Palmer hesitated. General demeanor. Victoria watched from the end of the table. Silent. Composed. Loading groceries with children. That was the indicator. Kowalski's deposition went worse. When pressed about the SUV conversation, he denied remembering specifics until Whitfield played a clip from Palmer's own body camera. Not the quota words themselves, but the casual lead-up, the tone, the context, enough to make the denial look exactly like what it was. By the time trial began, the courtroom was packed. Activists filled the gallery. Civil rights attorneys sat shoulder to shoulder behind Victoria. Media lined the back row. Notebooks open. Cameras waiting. At the defense table, Palmer, Kowalski, and Briggs sat in suits instead of tactical vests. Their confidence replaced by rigid stillness. Judge Andrea Thornton took the bench at 9 sharp. Known for precision. No patience for theatrics. Whitfield's opening was surgical. He played synchronized footage 6 angles at once. Body cams. Bystander phones. Store security video. The jury watched Victoria load groceries in real time. Watched the agents converge. Watched her calmly identify herself. Watched her credentials dismissed without verification. They watched her children panic. They watched the handcuffs close. The defense argued mistake. Good faith. A misunderstanding quickly corrected. Whitfield didn't raise his voice when he stood again. Quickly corrected. He said, "Is 3 hours and 42 minutes in a holding cell while 2 children wait with strangers." The jury leaned forward, and the trial was just getting started. The defense built its case on one word, mistake. Agent Palmer testified first. He spoke carefully. Coached. Said he believed he was acting within his authority. Said the situation was fluid. Said he had no racial motivation. When asked why he ignored Victoria's credentials, he claimed verification takes time and that officer safety required control first. Whitfield let him finish. Then he stood. What specific reasonable suspicion justified detaining Ms. Benjamin, he asked. Palmer shifted. Based on the totality of circumstances, no. Whitfield interrupted calmly. Name one specific fact. Silence. Palmer tried again. Her demeanor. Whitfield nodded. Describe it. Palmer looked at the jury. Looked at the judge. She appeared out of place. The words landed hard. Out of place. Whitfield repeated. In a grocery store parking lot. With her children. The courtroom went still. Next came Victoria's testimony. She walked to the stand in a tailored Navy suit. Texas State Bar pin visible on her lapel. She didn't dramatize. She didn't embellish. She spoke the way attorneys do when they know facts are enough. She described her career. 15 years of practice. No disciplinary history. Then she described that Saturday morning, the formation, the commands, the refusal to verify, the cuffs, her children screaming, and then she delivered the line the defense had prayed would never be heard aloud. Agent Kowalski said, "That's 3 this week from this zone. Should put us over quota for the month." Agent Palmer replied, "They're really pushing minority neighborhoods. Easy numbers. Downs of it. Why downs of it? Downs of it. Why downs of it?" Whitfield entered her contemporaneous notes into evidence, written the night of her release. Time-stamped. Witnessed. The defense objected. Hearsay. Speculation. Judge Thornton overruled. Then Whitfield introduced the emails. Internal ICE correspondence discussing performance metrics. Supervisor messages praising high-yield zones. Charts showing detention spikes mapped directly onto Black and Latino neighborhoods. The quota system wasn't alleged anymore. It was documented. Expert witnesses followed. A constitutional law professor explained the Fourth Amendment violations step by step. A child psychologist testified about Alex and Jamie's nightmares, anxiety, and fear of uniformed authority harm that would echo for years. The defense raised qualified immunity. Whitfield dismantled it with one sentence. They were told clearly, repeatedly, that they were violating her rights, and they continued anyway. The jury deliberated for 5 days. When they returned, the courtroom filled to capacity. Victoria sat perfectly still, hands folded, breathing even. The verdict was read aloud. Unlawful detention, guilty. Fourth Amendment violations, guilty. Racial profiling, guilty. Infliction of emotional distress, guilty. Unanimous. Palmer stared at the table. Kowalski went pale. Briggs didn't move at all. But the jury wasn't finished yet. Next came damages. And this time, the system would pay in numbers it couldn't explain away. The damages phase took one more day. The jury heard numbers. But more importantly, they heard impact. Compensation for Victoria's unlawful detention. For the violation of her constitutional rights. For the trauma inflicted on 2 children who watched their mother taken away in handcuffs by the very people meant to uphold the law. Then came punitive damages. Not just against the individual agents, but against the system that trained them, rewarded them, and looked the other way, while neighborhoods were treated like quotas instead of communities. When the jury returned for the final time, the room felt heavier, quieter. Judge Andrea Thornton read the numbers slowly. $15.4 million. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the gallery erupted gasps. Muffled applause. Tears. The gavel came down, sharp and firm. But even Judge Thornton couldn't fully contain the moment. At the defense table, Palmer stared at the floor like it might open beneath him. Kowalski's face had gone gray. Briggs sat frozen. The weight of consequence, finally undeniable. Victoria didn't react outwardly. No smile. No fist pump. Just a slow exhale she hadn't realized she'd been holding for months. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited. This was never about money. Victoria told reporters. It was about accountability. About making sure what happened to my children and me doesn't happen to another family. No one should be treated as suspicious simply for existing. The fallout was immediate. Palmer, Kowalski, and Briggs were suspended pending termination. Internal investigations expanded beyond Minnesota. Federal oversight committees opened inquiries into ICE performance metrics nationwide. Training protocols were rewritten. Detention quotas rebranded and quietly buried were dragged into the light. And Victoria went home. Back to Texas. Back to her children. Back to a life forever changed. She used part of the verdict to open Benjamin and Associates, a civil rights firm dedicated to unlawful detention, racial profiling, and abuse of authority. She hired young attorneys from marginalized communities, took cases no one else would, funded therapy for families like hers, taught clients not just how to survive the system but how to challenge it. Alex and Jaime grew older. The nightmares faded. Understanding replaced fear. They learned that what happened to their mother wasn't normal, and that injustice, when confronted with evidence and persistence, could be beaten. Years later, the grocery store parking lot looked like any other. Cars came and went. Families loaded trunks. Children begged for snacks. But near the entrance, a small plaque had been installed. Easy to miss if you weren't looking. Witness injustice. Document truth. Demand accountability. Victoria Benjamin had drawn a line there once handcuffed. Underestimated. Surrounded. And because she did, that line became harder to cross for everyone who came after her. If you made it this far, you already know why stories like this matter. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. And tell me in the comments what moment in this story stayed with you the most. Until next time.